Hi, welcome to today's lecture. Today we're going to talk about diversity, and diversity is something that is near and dear to my heart, per se. I was born and raised in Tennessee, and I did my PhD at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And while there, my research consisted primarily of diversity. So I looked at diversity issues in the state, diversity issues in the South, and perceptions of diversity among college students. So diversity is something that is very interesting to me, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. When most of us think about diversity, we think about the things that we can see. So if someone were to ask you, what is diversity, right? It's a buzzword. Organizations use it. Companies like to say we are diverse organizations. We hire diverse employees. Schools will say we have diverse student populations. So what does it mean to be diverse? What is diversity? Well, diversity, simply put, is the examination of our differences, right? So for something to be diverse, it means by its very nature that it's not similar or it's not homogeneous. So there's some difference that exists for anything to be diverse. Now, again, most of the time when we think about diversity, most people think about the things that we can see, right? The physical attributes of people, the differences that we can see among ourselves and other people, right? Gender, right? For instance, is the main thing that we see. Ethnicity, again, the things that we can see. And it's okay for that to be the starting point when we talk about diversity, but diversity is much more complex than that. And so I hope through today's lecture that we can highlight some of those differences and give you a better understanding of the complexities surrounding diversity. So I want you to think about diversity from what we call the iceberg scenario. And in icebergs are very complex things. I had the pleasure of going on an Alaskan cruise about 8 years ago, and to see icebergs out floating in the water, it was just, one, it was beautiful, it was breathtaking, but two, they have this mysterious appeal about them because only about 10 to 15% of the iceberg is composed of the part that we can see. So the part that floats above the water is the only thing that we can see, but there's this huge amount of mass. 80 to 90% of the iceberg is under the water, and we don't see that component. So I want you to shift your perspective around what diversity is, and I want you to now think about it not only from the things that we do see, right? As you can see here, the things that we can physically see in people: gender, actions, the way people act, race, ethnicity, style, behaviors, language, the things that we hear, right? So I want you to shift from an understanding of diversity in those terms to understanding that there is so much more in regards to diversity that we simply don't see. So we may all look alike. You could be in a room with someone who is your same age, same gender, same ethnicity, and you may think, wow, we have so much in common. We are not diverse at all. But that would be a very untrue and a very unfair assessment, because so much of our personal identity is made up of these things that people don't see or hear, the things that they don't know. So for instance, age, the values that we hold, our thoughts and our perspectives on life, our sexual orientations, our physical abilities, our life experiences, everything that has happened to us to make us the person that we are, our religions, our belief in religion, our non-belief in religion, and then type of religion, and then culture, right? So you can see here from this one chart that there's so much more that makes us unique as individuals and people than the things that we simply see. And all of these things is diverse. These are our diversities, the differences within us. I want to highlight this before we move to the next slide. You see here culture at the very bottom of the iceberg here, right? So we can make this even more complex. We can say there are differences, we have similarities and differences in all of these things. And then you get to culture. Well, what is culture, right? The book talks about culture as a set of ideas and behaviors that govern our interactions. Well, culture here, you see, this is a different way of looking at it as well. So you have your identity, who you are as a person, and that identity is composed of all of these things that surround it: your gender, your culture and faith, caring, responsibility, flexibility, work, your disabilities, well, I can't even pronounce it. Be honest, that's a hard word. You're probably never going to see it, but it simply means, are you indigenous to an area, right? So like you think Native Americans are indigenous to America. They were the first Americans, right? So where are you from? Are you from, we look at geographic locations and differences, right? If you're born and raised in the South, you may have a different cultural view of the world than if you were born and raised in the North, or if you were born and raised on one of the coast, or if you were born and raised in a different country and culture altogether, right? So differences and diversity were there. Sexual orientation, age, and your generation, right? Which generation were you born and raised in? Your skills and experiences. So all of those things make your identity, and culture, again, is part of that. But culture has its own iceberg, right? So culture in itself is very, very complex. So there's the things that make it very easy to see about culture. The language, easy to see or hear, the language that people speak, or right? Holidays and festivals that we choose to celebrate: Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, right? Other cultural celebrations, holidays and festivals that you may take part in. Folklore, dress, literature, foods, right? You think American food, you think what? Hamburger, hot dogs, right? French fries, right? So those are the easy things to see that can help identify cultural components of where someone is. But there are all of these additional difficult to see things that are, again, below the surface of the iceberg that make up so many components of our culture. You see here beliefs and assumptions, our self-concepts, relationship to authority, the biases that we may hold, body language, manners, interpretations, attitudes towards school, family values, what we believe about gender roles, use of humor, approaches to health and medicine, concepts of justice, pride, attitudes towards the environment, work ethic, child rearing practices, thought patterns, gestures, expectations, aesthetics, personal space, core values, family roles, right? Beauty ideals, all of these things go on and on and on. These are the things that make up a huge part of the cultural component of our identities that, again, are difficult to see. You don't look at someone walking down the street and say, well, yeah, clearly I understand their family values, and I can understand that person's core values just from the way that they're walking down the street. Right? Of course not. Those are not things that you can see. Those are all things that are below the tip of the iceberg. So you can see here how diversity is complex, so much more complex than the things we see in here when you look at it from the iceberg perspective. You have all of those components. Culture is one of those components, and culture has its own iceberg. Right? So you can see here the complexities surrounding diversity. So why is it important that we understand cultural diversity? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because we live in an increasingly diverse world. You will, I guarantee you will work and you will interact with people who embrace different religions, different values, different experiences, and different worldviews from you. And that is a good thing. We're going to talk about that. Effective communicators, right? People who succeed in terms of their communication skills, both personally and professionally, are going to be people who recognize that there are different vantage points from which people see the world, right? We've talked about this in the sense of your identity is comprised of all of these different components. But one of the major things around what makes you you is that some of your personal experiences, right? Everything that has happened to you up until this very point and moment in your life has helped shape who you are. You see the world through that vantage point, right? If you come from a background where where things have happened in your life that are difficult, that make it hard for you to trust people, right? Maybe you have your guard up. Well, that shapes your vantage point of people. That shapes your perspective of people. And every time you meet someone new, you are judging them through your field of experiences. You're seeing the world through your unique vantage point. Right? And that's okay. That's part of who we are. But we have to understand that people come from different places. They come from different ideals, different backgrounds. They have different experiences that shape their understanding of how the world exists and how they exist within that world. Right? So effective communicators will understand that all of these differences exist and that people are going to be coming from different backgrounds. And an effective communicator will acknowledge that and we'll appreciate that, and we'll talk about what that looks like. I want to talk briefly, though, about a few key things, cultural things here, that are fun and interesting before we dive back into the important takeaways and topics around diversity. So eye contact is probably the easiest, because eye contact, we use it here in the United States and much of the Western world as a means to express our interest in something. Right? We give someone our eye contact when we want to convey that we trust them, right? It conveys openness. It's a matter of respect. But in many parts of the world, eye contact is a dangerous thing, right? It's offensive for a man to look a woman in the eye. We talked about this in one of the previous lectures of my trip to Africa and how we were in Morocco, and the women weren't supposed to look at the men because it could be a symbol that they were interested in marrying them, right? That may sound crazy to us, but that's the cultural experience in some parts of the world. Same thing applies in Asia, where eye contact is often considered impolite and can be an invasion of space. Prolonged eye contact in some parts of the world can be viewed as a challenge, a sign of aggression, a battle of strength and power, right? So understand that eye contact, while it may be something that we use to convey openness here in the United States, those cultural expectations of that mean something different. Can mean something different somewhere else. Handshake's another thing that we do quite often. We shake hands in the U.S. and parts of Europe as a greeting, a way of saying hello. But in Japan, if you got off a plane and went to a business meeting with your company and you reached out to shake someone's hand, it would be considered aggressive. In those instances, a slight bow would be viewed as a much more common, less aggressive greeting. In the Middle East and some Asian countries, you would only use your right hand to shake hands because the left hand is considered dirty and unhygienic, because that's the hand that you would use when you go to the restroom to clean yourself, right? And so you would never want to shake hands. So most of us are right-handed. Most people are right-handed. So we would naturally shake with our right hand. My brother, for instance, though, he's left-handed, and he tries to shake with his left hand. And it's very awkward. One, because we're not used to shaking with our left hand. But two, there is a cultural component to that in some cultures. Waving, this one's a fun one. Americans love to wave. It really is an American thing. We wave all the time. You ever been out of the country, you go somewhere, people love to wave. In America and many other countries, if you put your hand out with the palm facing people, it's a well-meant, friendly gesture, right? However, if you were in Greece and you have your hand out and your fingers are separated, they call that the mutsa, which is an extremely offensive sign. It essentially means F you. Right? So you definitely would not want to do that. Has the same meaning in Pakistan and some other countries. I was in Greece several years ago, right after they were having issues with the riots and things like that, and independence movements and separation. Do they stay in the EU or do they not? And all of those things were boiling up within their own country. And I was on a tour bus full of Americans, and we're driving down the street, and you can see the symbols of the Greek Revolution where it had been spray painted on buildings and roads. And here I am on the bus full of Americans who just wanted to wave at everybody. They just put their hands up and they just waved. And I want to say, no, what are you doing? Right? I understood that it was a symbol of disrespect there, that you shouldn't do that. But to us, In America, right, you can't be any more friendly than waving at someone, right? So understanding, I want you to understand those things, or understand that if you're traveling abroad or if you're working in companies and organizations, that there are different vantage points, different ways to view culture and how we view the world. Let's take a quick look at a video here about diversity in organizations.
What does diversity mean to you?
So at AT&T, diversity encompasses all of the traditional aspects of diversity: race, gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. But for us, it goes way, way beyond that. Diversity is about ensuring that every single person comes to work every day and feels free to bring their full self to work. And it's not just welcoming, but it's really embracing and harnessing the diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of experience, diversity in education, not just the traditional aspects of diversity.
Diversity is obviously critical in that it's about difference. And it's about having different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experiences. That's huge.
Why is diversity a core business strategy for your company?
We know that a diverse and inclusive environment is critical to engaging our employees. It's critical to attracting and retaining the workforce of the future, and it's critical to meeting the needs of our customers.
The emerging workforce is what? The demographic of the United States, which again has an inexorable change to it. And so if you're going to be focused in on making sure you can bring talent into your organization and being relevant to that talent so that talent wants to work at the Coca-Cola Company, you have to focus in on that.
What are the biggest challenges in attracting a diverse workforce?
The fact that we do not have enough students who are entering and graduating with STEM degrees: science, technology, engineering, and math. The statistics today in this country, the education statistics, the high school dropout rate, and the lack of students being attracted to STEM degrees in college means that the current trends cannot support the hiring pipeline that companies like AT&T need in the future.
You have to really understand what's going on, in every community in which we operate, in every city that we operate in, and be able to speak to the diversity of perspectives that exist out there, the diversity of the consumer population, the diversity of the labor market, and you have to be able to speak in relevant ways.
So I really like that video. It's short, but I think it's powerful in terms of an understanding of why businesses value diversity in terms of the employees that they hire within an organization. If you think about diversity, if you read the news and you stay up to date, anytime there are diversity issues or conversations around diversities, oftentimes the first people who come to the defense of diversity are going to be major organizations, Google, Apple, right? They're going to come to the forefront and they're going to show how they value diversity and why it's important to them. And I think this video highlights why, right? Because businesses exist to create products or services to make money, but they are selling something, right? And so if you're selling something to Americans, right, you think about what does it mean to be an American? We are a very diverse country, right? We are comprised of a lot of differences, a lot of the differences that we've talked about. And so if you want to sell to a diverse workforce or a diverse America, you have to have a diverse workforce to help with that. Because think about it. I've been at organizations before where you sit around at the table and you try to solve a problem. And if you're all alike, if you all come from the same backgrounds, similar experiences, right, similar cultures, if you're not diverse, then there's going to be no diversity in thought, because you're going to be approaching something from the same viewpoint. And that's why diversity matters in organizations, because that diversity of thought, the diversity of experience, the diversity of background, all of those different things are going to allow people to see things from different perspectives. And that's very valuable and important in businesses, because you want to be able to see things differently. That will help you come up with better solutions, better products, and better services as a company. So in closing, in today's lecture on diversity, here's some advice for improving our interpersonal and intercultural communications, especially around diversity. We want to avoid ethnocentrism. Excuse me. And ethnocentrism is the belief that your culture is the best culture, right? That it's superior to all other cultures and all other groups out there, right? That your way of seeing things is the best. You want to avoid that, right? Because part of celebrating the value of diversity is highlighting the differences, but not highlighting the differences to say, hey, I'm better than you. My culture is better than you. My race is better than you. My educational experience is better than you. My background, my views on X, Y, Z, right? Highlighting diversity isn't, the goal of highlighting diversity isn't to do that. So we want to avoid ethnocentrism. We want to be open to the idea that people come from different perspectives, and that's a good thing. We also want to avoid stereotyping, and stereotype is when we judge people to be a certain way or to hold certain values or experiences based off of what we feel about a certain group of people. I think your textbook does a really nice job. It talks about stereotypes oversimplifying culture in the sense of, if you think of a gay male person as being someone who's feminine and effeminate, when the truth is that gay people can be anything, right? They're just as likely to be a truck driver, a physician, or an athlete as anyone else, right? But we stereotype. So similarly, Jews are both wealthy and poor. Asians are both gifted at math and not. And some black Americans are great athletes, but some are not, right? That's from your textbook on page 150. So I think it does a good job of highlighting that there are differences in terms of stereotypes that we shouldn't stereotype. So you want to avoid doing that. You also want to avoid prejudiceness, and prejudiceness is negative attitudes towards certain groups of people just because who they are. So we can talk about all of the things we've already talked about and said you were prejudiced against this type of person, X, Y, Z, right? Those prejudices do exist. We want to avoid those negative attitudes of judging people in negative ways simply because who they are. We want to accept the differences in other people, right? So we want to highlight and realize that there are differences in other people. We want to accept those differences, see the value in that. Also, it's important to recognize that we have our own cultural biases, right? So we have our own ways of seeing things that are shaped from our own cultural perspectives and experiences. And lastly, we want to observe and we want to learn. So the more that we know about other people, the more effective you'll be in terms of appreciating diversity. So it's hard to get to know someone and to break stereotypes and to avoid prejudiceness when you don't really get to know someone. So surround yourself with people who are different. That's a real good life lesson for life also, is don't surround yourself by people like you, because it's going to really narrow your ability to learn and grow as a person, because you're going to only be seeing things from your perspective, a perspective that you already share, right? So observe and learn, surround yourself by people who are different from you, and your worldview, your identity will be better because of it. All right, I hope you've learned a few more things about diversity and a better understanding of just how complex diversity can be in today's lecture.